Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. So excited for another Mock Draft Monday here, and it's the final Mock Draft Monday of the 2025 NBA Draft Cycle. Thank you all so much for all of the love, support, and engagement this draft cycle, whether it comes to just taking time out of your day to watch the videos, support the channel that way, leaving comments. I love hearing all of your guys' intuition and insight as well. Your analysis on these prospects, of course, you sit and listen to mine, but I always read what you have to say as well. So I just wanted to share a huge thank you. This time of the year is always really sentimental for me. I love going through this cycle. Obviously, as we get to the end of each draft cycle, I just kind of take a step back and ponder and think about how lucky I am, honestly, to have such great support, viewers like you. So I just wanted to say thank you. Make sure to leave a comment today, whether it's something as simple as Mock Draft Monday, or your thoughts on this draft, your thoughts on a specific prospect, who you want your team to get on draft night. Leave a little bit of manifestation down in the comment section maybe. But thank you all so much again. You guys know the drill. Leave a like and subscribe, especially if you're new. I'd really love to have you be a part of what we do here at Utility Sports. And let's jump forward into the actual mock draft here with the first overall pick, the Dallas Mavericks on the clock here. And I think for Dallas, it is very point blank simple. On draft night here, pick number 1 in 2025, the Dallas Mavericks will select forward Cooper Flagg out of Duke. And not only is this a no-brainer decision, it is an elite projection for the Mavericks moving forward. The ability to add in a two-way forward, someone who I deem to have all NBA floor potential. This is a guy who I think will at worst make multiple all NBA teams in his NBA career. And the reasoning behind that, an emerging skill set. You look at the developmental pathway that we've seen from him from 4 or 5 years ago as kind of this under the radar prospect out of Maine to now this undoubted first overall pick for the Duke Blue Devils. He has turned from a defensive minded prospect, someone who was drawing a lot of early comparisons to maybe Andre Karolinko, to this player who I now think is in the realm of the Paolo Bancheros, the Jason Tatums of the world, the guys who do go first overall, are shouldering heavy loads offensively while still being highly competitive defensively. And I think Jason Tatum really is the blueprint for Cooper Flagg to follow when it came to Tatum's progression from a downhill slasher, finisher at the rim, someone who plays with his shoulders and frame and body well into traffic. I think that's something Flagg can look at and develop from. But then also Jason Tatum's work with trainer Drew Hanlon to develop his handle, create more sidestep threes for himself, create perimeter opportunities. I think for Flagg specifically, the development really needs to center on his handle, ability to create space consistently out on the perimeter, win in isolation at a little bit of a higher rate, and just tighten up that handle when he's playing into traffic and space, because he's going to face a lot of nail help, gap help, drive help. There's going to be a ton of eyes on Cooper Flagg at all times. And that's where the development that we've seen over the last few years as well as a passer, a scorer, a shooter has been really instrumental in giving me a lot of belief in Flagg's long-term development, his ability to turn into an all-NBA player at worst, and very likely a Hall of Famer down the road. This is a guy that I think for Dallas, with a team that's ready to compete right now, is going to be able to do so. They're going to be a very good team. I think Texas, especially Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, all three of them have been in the headliners this offseason a little bit. They're all going to be very good competitive teams. And I think Dallas specifically, of course, struck gold, landing the first overall pick, getting a two-way, soon-to-be superstar in Cooper Flagg to guide the future of this franchise post Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving down the road. Pick number 2, we now take a look at the San Antonio Spurs. And I talked about Texas being in the headliners. This is exactly what I'm talking about. San Antonio and Dallas picking at 1 and 2 in this draft, and the Spurs specifically, even though there's been rumors about will the Sixers try and trade up, teams are looking to get this pick pretty aggressively. I think the Spurs are going to hold firm, hold strong. This is something I've said all offseason. As soon as San Antonio got this pick, I have maintained the entire same position. The Spurs will not trade this pick, and they will draft guard Dylan Harper out of Rutgers. I think he is very clearly the second best player in this draft class at this point in time. You could make a real argument that he's got the best handle in this draft. I think he and Jeremiah Fears are 1 and 2 in that discussion. But unlike Fears, Harper has a much better downhill track record when it comes to finishing at the rim, generating more consistent paint touches, and being more consistent as a finisher out of those opportunities. He's got better positional size. He's got really emerging footwork that I think is a solid barometer and start place for him, especially going into the NBA where, listen, I don't think he's at a point where he's going to walk in and score 20 points per game or anything like that, but I do think he is set up for success and to expand upon his downhill scoring with a collection of additional moves that you could add into his arsenal. I think a stride stop would move mountains for Dylan Harper and kind of differentiating his pace as a downhill finisher. I think a little bit more decel, more Euro steps. I think getting a little bit wider on Euro steps. He did do it a little bit at Rutgers. I'd like to see him get a little bit more lateral space doing them, and adding a spin move. And I think would all kind of take another step forward for his game. And I think those are all teachable qualities to give him. And it's all about repetition and hard work to drive him there. And I think the Spurs not only have been an organization that has clearly been beneficial for young player development over the last 20 years, but now with Greg Popovich no longer as the head coach, it gives Mitch Johnson another ball handler, another creator for their offense to create easy opportunities for Victor Wembanyama. I think you have a great collection of guards there now with De'Aaron Fox, Dylan Harper, and Stephon Castle. Not very often in NBA history has a team complained about having too much talent. So for those in the perspective of, oh, well, the Spurs don't need Dylan Harper, yeah, not needing somebody doesn't mean it's not a good idea to have them. I don't think the Warriors really needed Kevin Durant. They got him, and they were pretty much unbeatable. I think for San Antonio, like getting Dylan Harper, holding Dylan Harper, and having a really great young core nucleus moving forward is something you just can't pass up on. And the Spurs would be, I think, pretty stupid to mess this up and not draft Dylan Harper second overall. At number 3, the Philadelphia 76ers here. This is a fantastic opportunity for them, but with some of the drama lately, Ace Bailey was scheduled to work out for them, canceled his workout. The Sixers, I have very often mocked Ace Bailey for them after the draft lottery on May 12th this year. That will not be the case in this mock draft now, just a couple days away from the NBA draft itself. So, third overall, I have the Sixers selecting guard VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor. And one of the reasons I have strayed away from making this mock selection for them is they drafted Jared McCain last year. He had a really great rookie season when he was healthy. Didn't play a ton of games, but when he was on the court, he was very impactful for them and scored the ball at a pretty good rate. And of course, they have Tyrese Maxey, who took a step forward last year from an individual standpoint. They still have Joel Embiid. So this team, while it does have a lot of guard play right now, they're still in a spot where you would imagine they are going to be able to compete. Edgecombe, as a true freshman coming out of Baylor, the Bahamas prospect, I think there's going to be a little bit of complication here with trying to maximize his long-term development, especially with that guard room. One of the things I thought for Ace Bailey specifically is they still had clear pathways to minutes, whereas Edgecombe's going to probably share that backcourt a bit and maybe not have a clear pathway to 32 minutes a night in year one of his career. But I do think there's a lot of functionality still at play. Think about how dominant Joel Embiid has been out of the nail, playing out of the middle of the floor, one of the most popular spots for super talented big men to play. Jokic, Embiid both kind of dominate and occupy that area a lot. I think for Edgecombe specifically, as someone who could be a dynamic baseline cutter, someone who can get out and run in transition, I think he'd be a fun fit next to Maxey. I do think there's some real functionality here, maximizing some of Edgecombe's physical gifts and athletic tools next to some of the existing talent already on the 76ers roster. I do think the defensive event creation could be a fun little tool for them as well. I think Edgecombe still has a long way to go from really going from an advantage finisher and an elite advantage creator at times in college to just flat out a great player. Like, I think there's a little bit of a half-court gap that he has to overcome here when it comes to attention to detail, technical skills, when it comes to navigating screens, defending at the point of attack, forcing direction, riding hips. All that kind of stuff has a lot of room yet for Edgecombe to grow, but unlike most of the prospects in this draft, he has so many physical advantages that it's going to give him platforms and opportunities and room to make mistakes, recover from them, and then learn from them. And I think that's one of the things that really has me excited for his NBA future, especially landing in a team like Philadelphia where Nick Nurse is kind of a hard-style head coach. He's going to expect good things from him immediately, and if he's not providing those things, he'll get sit on the bench a little bit. And I do think that is good for young players' development. If you're going out there and you don't have expectations and you're allowed to make mistakes, that can be good. It gives you confidence. But at the same time, when you're held to expectations, it forces you to play a certain style, and it forces you to learn from mistakes and to stop making them over time. And I think Nick Nurse and the Sixers can kind of offer that environment here for Edgecombe, and I think that'll be good for him in a variety of fronts, both offensively and defensively. At number 4, the Charlotte Hornets become a really interesting team at this spot now, with Ace Bailey still on the board here, falling down from pick number 3, where I most often mocked him because of the latest developments with his workout schedule. Charlotte's in a spot where do they look at Ace Bailey? I think the Ace Bailey fit with LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller is quite complicated. It's not inherently terrible, especially if you have a smart creative coach who could spam small-to-small screens and force switches, and you get some slips downhill. You try and gear your offense that way. You can make it work, I think, pretty well, actually. But you have to have that kind of creative, smart head coach, and it's not the easiest thing to bet on. Now, I don't think Charles Lee's a bad coach, and he comes from a Boston tenure that would probably help him succeed with this kind of trio. But we are not going to go with Ace Bailey for the Hornets at 4, because I do think that Hornets front office is going to be looking for a little bit of a different style fit into their team. So 4th overall, I have the Charlotte Hornets selecting wing Knueppel out of Duke. And I think this is a very clear, decisive fit for the Hornets. And the reason why, Knueppel is a decisive player. And that decisiveness, that ability to quickly operate with the ball in his hands, is going to make him a good long-term fit next to guys like Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, who maybe toy with their food a little bit more, handle the ball for longer stretches of time. And if you get a player who can be an elite movement shooter, off the catch, rip and go kind of guy like Knueppel is, it gives you a lot of functionality into your half-court offense without really bogging things down. You can still get out in transition and run. One of the things I liked most about Brandon Miller's rookie season a few years ago was how often Charlotte was seemingly getting out and running, and how that led to some easy baskets for Miller. I think the pace, the up-tempo approach for Charlotte long-term is going to be very advantageous for them in maximizing both Knueppel and Brandon Miller. And I think Knueppel, one thing about him too that has been a little under-discussed throughout this process, even at times by myself, he is a better on-ball player than he's given credit for. Had a ton of success with Khaman Maluach this year as a screen set and dive player. I think if you're looking at fitting into Charlotte, assuming they hold on to Mark Williams, Williams can be a very dynamic screen roll, lob threat kind of big for Knueppel to work with as well. And that's where Khan's patience, his ability to kind of work and probe into the paint a little bit, play off of 2 feet, limit turnovers in that regard, and really be safe with the basketball, I think will be an advantage that Charlotte gets to play with and work around as well, while they give him maybe 10% of his reps on the basketball and 90% off the basketball. And I think that's where you get a little bit of that dynamism. He's not quite to the Reed Shepherd level, where Houston's mostly experimented with Shepherd playing point guard in his minutes. I don't think Knueppel will ever be a point guard, but I do think there is some on-ball functionality that's been a little understated. Was really good for Duke with the ball in his hands. Now, scaling up to the NBA game is going to be a little bit more challenging, but landing in a context where you have LaMelo, you have Brandon Miller probably being the tops of the totem pole when it comes to the scouting report, Knueppel should have some advantageous matchups still to work with, and he's very adept at using a good big screener who can catch lobs at the rim, and Mark Williams still does provide that for Charlotte, even with all of his injury concerns he's endured early in his NBA career. At 5, we move on to the Utah Jazz, and I think for Utah specifically, there's a lot of optionality here, right? People want to know, would they be an Ace Bailey landing spot? Well, I do think Austin Ainge will consider everything, and this leadership change for Utah, obviously not a drastic one, going from Danny to Austin Ainge, but still a drastic one in the fact that it's a different person, right? It's same family, but you have a different leader now. And I do think Austin Ainge, you look at his experience in Boston, some of the smart decisions that the Celtics have made over the years in accruing talent, finding talent. And in his press conference, I think he really nailed it, saying the best way to build a good team is to just make good decisions consistently. And this is his first chance of that. Pick number 5 is an incredibly important opportunity for the Jazz to start building their long-term future. And I think they're going to go with an elite play finisher, someone who can really catch and shoot the basketball, function without the ball in their hands, but then also thrive with it in their hands in some settings. So 5th overall of the Utah Jazz here, selecting guard Trey Johnson out of Texas. And I specifically think this is the fit for Utah because I think long-term what they're trying to do is create a team with a lot of spacing. You look at how Boston looked to play with how spaced out they were, 5-out setting, their ability to catch and shoot a ton of threes. I think Austin Ainge is going to want to win the analytics game. I think he's going to want to shoot more threes than his opponent. And he's already got a really great play finisher on the roster in Lauri Markkanen. If Utah does keep Lauri this offseason, you add Trey Johnson into that mix. You could argue Utah is one key top-end player away from having a super competitive roster. Now, it's hard to get that number one top-end guy, but the Jazz are loaded with future draft capital. They have a far-out Suns pick. They have some Wolves assets. They've got some Cavaliers assets. They've got assets and draft picks to find a way to add to this roster, and they could still be in the running next year for an AJ Debonsa or a Darren Peterson or a Cam Boozer. So Utah, I think right now, if you're looking at a long-term approach, finding a guy who can be an excellent long-term fit as a movement shooter, an off-ball catch-and-shoot guy. I've compared him a little bit to Tyler Hero. There's some shades of Devin Booker in here as well. At minimum, you're getting an elite shooter in the NBA in Trey Johnson, someone with very good athletic gifts. He's going to be able to compete on defense. Now, I do have concerns about his functional play strength. I think getting downhill is going to be a real challenge for him in the NBA. I do question his two-point efficiency. Shot sub 45% at Texas on twos this past year, which is a pretty glaring red flag in my opinion. But it's not a red flag that should deter teams from drafting him in the top 10. I still had him as a top 5 prospect on my big board this year. I think the three-point efficiency itself is something that makes him an outlier good prospect because of how valuable shooting is in the NBA and the functionality of Trey Johnson specifically, both as an off-the-dribble guy and a movement catch-and-shoot guy. Those things are irreplaceable and very valuable. And for Utah, you at least are getting a safe pick, someone who has starter potential at the bare minimum probably, but you're looking at someone who maybe if everything hits, turns into a 1 or 2 time All-Star, kind of like what we've seen from Tyler Hero at this point in time. Now we look at the Washington Wizards at number 6. And I think for Washington specifically, this is a great chance for them to take a swing. And that's what they're going to do here. Last year, we saw Alex Sarr force his way down to pick number 2 in the draft, ultimately passed up on Atlanta to land in Washington. And I think the Wizards right now are a team that a lot of prospects and players are looking to land into because it's kind of an open invite to minutes and opportunity and touches and playtime. And that's what a lot of prospects want. That's what agents want for their prospects, to get on the court early in their careers, not get buried in the depth chart. So 6th overall, another prospect here in this mock draft forces his way to Washington. That is Ace Bailey out of Rutgers. A bit of a slide in my mock draft. Of course, last week went 3rd overall to Philadelphia. Now he falls down to pick number 6 to the Washington Wizards. But I still really like this outcome for him because it's an option to play around other talent, young talent, and I do think at the very bare minimum for Ace Bailey, you're going to be able to uncover a lot of his talent as a catch-and-shoot ace, as a guy who can function off the basketball. One of his best games this year came in a setting where he didn't have to dribble the ball much, and I think that's, first of all, an indicator of some of the concerns I have with him as an on-ball player. I don't think he's functionally talented enough at this point from a dribble pass shoot perspective to be an elite go-to guy. I do think maybe there's a little bit of that Brandon Ingram in there where, hey, he can put up points, he can score the ball, shoot a lot of mid-range jump shots, and lead your team in scoring, but you might finish with a 35-47 record, right? You might not be a great team. And that's a concern for me. That's why I would not put the ball in his hands frequently. Washington might choose to do that. I don't love that for them. One thing I also would be concerned about here, with how thin Alex Sarr is, I don't know if he's the best screen setter to pair with Ace Bailey long-term if you're looking to play into that style. But one thing's very clear and obvious here. The Wizards are looking for upside. They're looking for athleticism. They're looking for a guy who could have some two-way impact as well. It's one of my favorite things the Wizards have been able to accomplish on their draft nights, is finding guys who can really impact the defensive end of the floor, with Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr being, of course, the headliners there. Ace Bailey has some potential to grow into there as well. Covers ground very well. Long arms, closes out pretty well, especially when he leaves his feet. He's able to erase a lot of space with that. And he also has some interesting screen navigation tools. Now, I think he has to get stronger. I think the offensive game still has a lot of room to grow. It's going to take a lot of work. This is a player who, if he develops his handle and blossoms, could turn into a really awesome player. I'm a little more skeptical about him ever reaching that All-Star or All-NBA upside that a lot of others view him as having. But I do think there's some talent to work with for sure. The shot making is impressive. And I think at the very worst, he's a good movement shooter in the NBA and offers some good two-way versatility because of his size and length, and also the rebounding value he brings to a team as a wing. At 7, we now look at the New Orleans Pelicans, and I think New Orleans, now having 2 first-round picks in this draft, makes them a very intriguing team to consider and watch for in this draft. They have pick 7, also acquired pick 23 from Indiana just this past week in a interesting trade. And now at 7, I have the Pelicans here drafting Khaman Maluach out of Duke. This is a prospect that has been heavily linked to the New Orleans Pelicans. Of course, Joe Dumars there, now guiding the ship for the Pelicans and this New Orleans team. They did make headliners last year drafting Yves Missi, someone who had a tremendous rookie year for himself, especially given his draft slot picked in the 20s last year. And I think for New Orleans, while some fans would say, well, why would we take Maluach? We just took Missi. I've been a long believer in the value of good center play, and especially 48 minutes of good center play. Look around the league. Look at the best teams. Look at what led Dallas to the NBA Finals last year with Luka Doncic. They had Derik Lively and Daniel Gafford. Their team really took off after acquiring Gafford. You look at OKC, Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. You look at Cleveland, who led the East in wins this year. What did they have? Oh, they had Mobley and Allen. You look at Boston when they won their title. Guess what they had in their front court? Porzingis and Horford. You look across the league the year prior with Cat and Gobert. Teams that have good centers, and I'm talking multiple of them, tend to succeed at a really good rate. And I think for New Orleans, if you want to take that next step forward, it's not about just having one good center who can play 26 to 30 minutes a night. It's about having two good centers who can fill that center position for 48 minutes every single game. And Maluach and Missi would be one of the best long-term center combinations in the league. Both of them very athletic. Maluach is a huge human target who is an elite lob catcher, the best screen setter in this entire draft. And New Orleans now having another pick at 23 gives them the chance to maybe come back later in the draft, find a point guard for the future, find someone who they could maybe stick some long-term development planning into, and hopefully build their roster up long-term that way while still having some competitive veterans on their team when DeJounte Murray comes back healthy, CJ McCollum, of course, and then Zion Williamson does a good dose of the ball handling when he's on the court too. So New Orleans is about kind of building that infrastructure, building up that center room, adding more rim protection, adding screen setting, adding rim gravity, and Maluach maybe even has some offensive potential to grow into too. If you want to see him develop in that way, I don't really care if he ever shoots the three ball. I don't really want him handling the ball too much. I think his value is best suited as a screen and dive, screen and roll player. But there is some other aspects to his game that you can maybe uncover, which would have some functionality on a possession-to-possession basis at different points of the season. Pick number 8, the Brooklyn Nets here now. And I think Brooklyn is another fascinating team to talk about. 4 first-round picks in this year's draft. Definitely will be a team to watch and monitor for trades. Now, I don't have trades in this mock draft, but a disclaimer, my final mock draft, which will be somewhat similar to this one, but a little bit different, will have trades on Wednesday. So the day of the draft, I will have another mock draft out on the channel, and that one will have mock trades in it as well. So if you're a Nets fan, stay tuned for that one because I will be making some projections on where Brooklyn could potentially move on draft night. But 8th overall here, I have them selecting Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma, and I think this is a very clear fit for the Nets. A team that badly needs point guard play gets one of the more dynamic point guards in this entire draft. I think this is the floor for Jeremiah Fears on draft night. I would be shocked if he makes it to pick number 9, just because I do think there are a collection of teams that will consider him before 9. I think the Wizards at 6 will look at him. I think the Pelicans at 7 will heavily consider him. And then the Nets at 8, I think, are the kind of ultimate landing spot where if he makes it to them, they will select him because they do need a point guard. They do have D'Angelo Russell as an unrestricted free agent this offseason. They have a very mighty cap hold on him, $28 million. He won't make that much money, but Brooklyn, you look at their roster, you look at ways for Jordi Fernandez to improve his team offense. It's about guard play, and it's about getting more guys who can score, create at a high level. Jeremiah Fears had some real big moments this past year for the Sooners where he would step up, end a game, get to the free throw line, get to the rim, shoot and make some big threes. Now, he didn't do it consistently throughout the course of the year, shot just 28% from 3. His true shooting percentage isn't great, but as a true freshman who reclassified up, was playing as an extremely young point guard in the SEC, had a ton of success for his age and for his role. And I think if you're kind of projecting him moving forward, Brooklyn, I could definitely see themselves talking themselves into him because there's just a lot to like from an actual film standpoint. The handle's very dynamic, solid crossover, snakes the screens really well in pick and roll. That's something I like about his game. And he just is able to play into traffic and bumps. He holds his drive lines really well, gets his shoulders low to the ground. And I honestly think he's a little bit of a burly Kemba Walker. I just think his ability to kind of play into bumps, play into traffic. He's a little bit more functionally strong, in my opinion, than Kemba was, but he's still got some of that dynamism as a drive, snatch, crossover, tween, get to certain spots on the court, and that's a good player. And I think for Brooklyn at 8, that's a player that they could look to build around and introduce into Jordy's system that would give them a little bit more dynamism outside of just their big kind of flowing into dribble handoffs. Having a guy who can create and win in isolation, create and win in ball screens, and then also take some of those advantages out of DHOs and score and facilitate off of them as well is what makes Fear such an intriguing prospect for me at number 8 for Brooklyn. At number 9, the Toronto Raptors here now. Of course, this team has been linked to some trade down rumors. You'll have to see if I actually mock a trade down for them or not on Wednesday. But here as of today for Monday, our final mock draft Monday on the channel, this draft cycle, I do have the Raptors at this spot selecting forward Noah Essengue out of Ratio Farm Ulm. And Essengue has been an elite play finisher all year long for Ulm and has been tremendously impactful playing over in Germany as a play finisher, cutter, transition scorer, and then has also covered a ton of ground defensively, getting in the passing lanes a little bit, operating as a weak side help shot blocker. I think defensively, that's really what you're drafting him for. Toronto, toward the end of the year, started to really grow and develop defensively as a team unit. And of course, you're introducing Brandon Ingram into the mix. He has been a part of some solid team defenses in the past. You look at what New Orleans was able to do with him for a few years. With all the length and defensive acumen that the Pelicans had for a while. Now you look at Toronto specifically, you get Essengue into the mix. You have Ingram, who's long and can defend adequately well for his position. And you already have an improving team defense with one of the more special defenders in the league in Scotty Barnes, who again covers a lot of ground and space. This team is going to be a lot of fun defensively. I think Essengue fits into the offensive identity of move the ball, cut, play without it. And I think the Raptors, with the way that they share the ball, the way that they move the ball, could uncover some of the talent that Essengue has that we've already seen successfully working overseas in Europe with the play style of cutting, play finishing, scoring at the rim, getting to the free throw line because of his athletic traits. There's a lot of talent here for a team to continue working with. And then there's also a litany of potential for him because right now there are still areas of his game that are very raw. Doesn't handle the ball very well. I think needs to get functionally a lot stronger. And then also the shooting touch is a real question mark. But despite all of those things, he's been highly productive and positively impactful. And I think if you're able to develop, hone in some of those other skills, you're getting an absolute steal here at 9 potentially. Now, I don't tend to love to bank on potential, but I think from a floor standpoint, this is still someone who's going to have some significant two-way impact because of his sheer length, size, and athletic gifts. Now, moving on to pick 10. Welcome to the Phoenix Suns into the lottery. Of course, made headlines on Sunday trading Kevin Durant to the Houston Rockets, in return acquiring Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, 5 second-round picks, and this very selection here at pick number 10. And I think for Phoenix specifically, you look at how small their current roster is. A ton of guards. Their two-way players specifically focusing in on Ty Washington, Collin Gillespie. Both of them are point guards. You look at Dylan Brooks, a true wing. Look at Jalen Green, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal. This team is very small. Now, they do have Nick Richards. They do have Oso Ighodaro, who they drafted last year. They still have Ryan Dunn, who they drafted in the first round last year. The Suns team does have a little bit of size, but not much of it, especially with how heavy their minutes look to be slanted toward guards. So I think one of my key concerns for Phoenix right now is getting bigger, getting a little bit more size, and still adding talent and skill. And I think that intersection works perfectly here for the Suns while providing a lot of lineup flexibility for them too. Drafting a prospect I really love, 10th overall. I have the Suns selecting /center Derik Queen out of Maryland. And I think this is a twofold problem that the Suns have to solve. They have to find a guy who can not only fit their team, bring talent and skill, but also bring size. And Derik Queen does a lot of that. And I think with his positional flexibility between being a center at times and a power forward at other times, Phoenix is going to be able to uncover some fun lineups where, hey, maybe they want to play big, which is something it's hard to kind of foresee Phoenix being able to do right now. But if they draft Queen, you could throw out lineups with Queen and Nick Richards on the court and run 45 action with Queen handling the basketball off the top of the key. But one of the safest aspects of Queen's game, which is what makes me so incredibly high on him, is I think there's so much functionality in other areas outside of just having the basketball. I think right now a lot of people are comparing him to the Domantas Sabonis, Alperen Şengün, Nikola Vucevic kind of players, and I understand that because skill set wise there are some similarities. But one of the things that I like about Queen most specifically is he's got elite short roll talent that makes him at least a good fit next to other shot creators and ball handlers. That's something we haven't gotten to see Şengün really thrive the most with in his NBA career so far based on who he's played with. But Şengün, just as a short roller, has been successful next to Van Vliet as a facilitator of the middle of the floor. I think Queen can give you some unique advantages for Phoenix when Devin Booker has the ball. You set a screen, short roll against drop coverage. It's going to be a real challenge as Booker kind of gets to his spots on the floor. Queen kind of fills into the pocket, the nail, and from there he has the touch to finish, the ability to catch and drive if you close out a little aggressively on him from about 15 feet out. And then from there as well, he's got the playmaking where you get high lows. You can set him up with Nique Richards for lobs. I think there's a lot of functionality here for Ott to work with, their new head coach. And I think for Phoenix specifically, this is a no-brainer pick at number 10. If Derik Queen makes it to them, which he definitely probably will, with the way things are kind of shaping up and seeming to play out at this point, Derik Queen impacts a lot of what Phoenix needs. They need size, they need talent, they need skill, they need fit. Derik Queen does all of it. He can fit with a variety of their different lineups. I think can be functional next to Devin Booker. I think can be functional next to Nique Richards, but can also be a pivot point for them where, hey, maybe we want to play him as the sole center and try and put Ryan Dunn as the 4. And you build a lineup with some length and speed. Dillon Brooks is an elite point of attack defender. This team has some versatility and functionality that way now if they draft Derik Queen on draft night. And I think that's what they need to do and should do at pick number 10 ultimately this year, which is why I'm projecting it for them in the first mock draft that has them with this pick. Pick 11, we shift to the Portland Trailblazers, and the board looks a little bit different. Of course, I have not been mocking the Houston Rockets' Derik Queen much, so with Derik Queen now off the board at number 10, it slides some things around. Different prospects available here for Portland, and the Blazers looking to amplify their team defense, of course, which is kind of bookended by Donovan Clingan and Toumani Camara. They're able to add more athleticism, more length, and more defensive talent into their core with pick 11 by selecting Carter Bryant out of Arizona. This is another prospect with some defensive intangible upside that is going to be hard to replace. His physical gifts, his ability to cover space, his strength, he's got an NBA-ready frame. I think that's one of the things that's really stood out to me this entire cycle on Carter Bryant. When you look at him and compare him physically to someone like Noah Essengue, who we had go at pick number 9 in this mock draft to Toronto, Carter Bryant's filled out like an NBA forward. He looks the part. He is somebody who I think body type-wise is going to be able to adjust pretty quickly to the game. Now, I think there still needs to be some significant skill set development, but for Portland, who has a lot of investment into this core team moving forward, has a lot of investment in Scoot Henderson's continued development and Shaedon Sharpe's continued development and Clingan's development, this is a fit piece for them at number 11. This is a functional half-court player who can catch and shoot the basketball, had a really great season for Arizona doing just that in a low-usage role, but then also very talented as a cutter, works the baseline well, super functional athlete when it comes to finishing above the rim. And I think if you're looking to maximize Donovan Clingan as a playmaking hub, a passer off the top of the key, and a screen setter off the ball, Carter Bryant's physical gifts kind of unlock certain elements of the floor to work with, whether it's working off the baseline or vertical space as a lob threat. There's a lot of talent here and a lot of functionality for Portland to work with while not having to kind of reshuffle their deck in terms of who has what role. I think Carter Bryant is solely additive to this team offensively because he's not going to require a ton of touches. He's not going to be an on-ball guy that you're trying to incorporate in. He's a fit player. He's an off-the-catch player. He's an off-the-ball player, which I think fits them and what they need at this point in time. And then defensively, you're adding to your existing talent, getting a little bit more athletic, adding another guy into the mix who can guard the basketball. This will give you spell minutes for Toumani Camara, which I think will be good for him and maybe help foster even more offensive development for Camara, giving him some more opportunities to rest and not be tasked with guarding the ball as consistently. And I think with that in mind, Portland here is at a spot now at 11 where Carter Bryant becomes a real seamless fit into their overall team identity moving forward. At 12, the Chicago Bulls become a fascinating team to talk about. Derik Queen, of course, was a player that has been kind of in the mix for them at this spot, but with the board shaking out the way that it has, we're going to look for an international guard prospect. 12th overall, I have the Chicago Bulls selecting guard Kasparas Jakucionis here from Illinois. This is definitely a prospect I could see Arturas Karnisovas considering strongly in this draft. And if you look at Chicago specifically, Josh Giddey headed toward restricted free agency. If they're looking for a little bit of leverage, drafting another guard might help them in that kind of battle a bit to save a little bit of money. Not sure it's going to have a huge impact, but it might have a slight one. And I think for Chicago specifically, a team that's looking to play with so much pace, one of the biggest changes for Billy Donovan over the last 3-4 years of his head coaching tenure in the NBA has been adjusting his pace, increasing the tempo for his roster. And of course, the player acquisition of Josh Giddey has helped that. Matas Buzelis has helped that as well. And I think you draft Jakucionis here, you get another player who I think can fit the team identity of spacing, pace, and passing fluidity, where I think the Bulls are trying to build a team unit that is selfless and can play off of each other at a high rate. Giddey, of course, embodies that. Buzelis has some traits that fit that really well. And then Jakucionis can be another amplifier of that too in Chicago. Now, I do think this comes with some limitations, both athletically and from a scoring upside in the half-court perspective. Jakucionis is pretty heavily reliant on the three ball. Doesn't have the tools to win in isolation a ton. This isn't a build-around 1A player. This is a good fit player. My biggest concern for Chicago, they're still missing that 1A guy. We'll see if they ever find a pathway to getting one of those players. But Jakucionis, I think, at the very worst, could be another good amplifier of their existing talent on the roster, even if it isn't a true 1A guy that he's fit off of and amplifying moving forward. 13, the Atlanta Hawks, a team that I think very likely will find a guard and a big in this draft at 13 and 22. Now, which way do they go? Do they go big at 13 and guard at 22, or do they go guard here at 13 and big at 22? That's a huge question, and one that I think will be an interesting one to watch play out on draft night in just a couple of days. But the Hawks at 13, I have them here selecting guard Egor Demin out of BYU. I think there are a lot of personal ties here that would draw him toward the Hawks organization. Specifically, you look at the way that this team has tried to operate and build. They've built a lot of team defensive-minded pieces around Trae Young, but they're still lacking a little bit offensively in terms of creation and guys who can handle in the pick and roll. And I think Demin, even though he comes with his own host of flaws, I don't think he handles ball pressure well. I think he's very screen reliant as a downhill player in the NBA. He even was in college for BYU in the Big 12. But I think for Demin specifically, what you're hoping to uncover here is someone who could be an interesting fit off of Trae Young as this big forward who can pass the ball, be connective in those areas, and then hopefully the swing skill, the shooting really develops to a point where he's actually good at it. So far he hasn't been, but hopefully, from individual workouts and combine stuff, like I could see GMs and executives feeling pretty confident about him going into his NBA career as a shooter long term. And then for Atlanta, when Trae Young is off the court, you're hoping that Demin can be a go-to ball handler, a go-to creator for your team. Now, I do have concerns and questions about that. I think Dyson Daniels would probably shoulder more of that load at a comfortable level than Demin will. But this is, again, a long-term perspective. You're taking Demin because you're believing in the long-term growth of his talent and skills. He is an interesting prospect when it comes to his overall feel and playmaking vision, and those are hard things to bet against. So when you have a guy as smart and as connective as Demin, it's just about trying to find ways to make him work. And I think Atlanta kind of gives you a little bit of the best of both worlds, where you give him some opportunity to grow as an on-ball player, but at the very worst, you can kind of reduce that role, have him play off of Trae Young, and you're kind of still playing your same style of play, but now you have another guy who's a little more connective into that mix too. At 14, the San Antonio Spurs on the clock here again. Of course, went with Dylan Harper, number 2 overall. And at number 14 with this selection, I have them going out and targeting center Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown. I think for the Spurs specifically, after going with the guard, there's a few different ways this team could look. They were tied to Kevin Durant. Now, they didn't aggressively pursue it from my understanding, but they were a team in the mix for this big, long, lengthy forward that Kevin Durant is. They could look at the front court in a variety of ways. They either look at a center like Thomas Sorber, who has some elite rim protection talent, some value in drop coverage, of course, can get out and guard on the perimeter a little bit, some decent fluidity and mobility skills for someone at his listed weight of 250 plus pounds, measured in a little heavy at the combine. I think part of that is because he's coming off of an injury where he didn't get to play a ton. So keep that in mind. But I think for San Antonio, you're betting on the defensive talent. You're betting on the rim protection, especially when Wembanyama's off the court. You need someone who can help anchor your defense. I talked about it with New Orleans. 48 minutes of good center play is irreplaceable. Sorber's a guy who I definitely think could foot that bill for them when Wemby's off the floor. Now, the question is, do you want to invest a lottery pick on a guy to only play or to have a backup center role? It is a pretty hefty investment, a pretty pricey investment, but I do think for San Antonio specifically, if you want to be a playoff team, you want to compete at a high level, you need to build your team defense. Sorber can be a positive additive to that. And then there is still some offensive juice to uncover as well, with some playmaking feel, some short roll functionality, some mid-post face-up play that I think is pretty unrivaled in this draft outside of Derik Queen. So the Spurs definitely getting a prospect here who is going to have some impact defensively and some significant offensive talent to work with and build off of when it comes to his long-term potential and growth in the league. So again, I'm not as high on Sorber as others. I have him top 20 on my board, but I'm not like completely sold and moved by him as an elite prospect or anything like that. But I think for the Spurs at 14, you're getting a player who has some moldable traits offensively and someone who at the very worst is going to give you more rim protection, which you can never have enough of in today's NBA. At 15 now, the Oklahoma City Thunder, their first of two selections in this year's draft. And at 15 for OKC, which really important Game 7. I am recording this right before Game 7. We'll see what happens. This might be your new NBA champion. If not, Thunder fans, I'm sorry to rub a little bit of salt in the wound. But OKC at 15, I have here selecting forward Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. I absolutely love this fit for the Thunder. This is another guy who's highly connected. One of the things I think OKC could do a lot better is move the ball a little bit quicker. Now, of course, they still want to funnel a lot of their offense toward their guards and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams, and understandably so. But having a guy like Collin Murray-Boyles who can be a screen, short roll, cut and facilitate, catch in the middle of the floor, make a read, all of that has functionality in the playoffs. I think CMB next to Chet Holmgren's a really interesting fit. I think CMB next to Hartenstein, the connectivity between those two guys would be actually quite fun. You can use CMB in kind of a small center role where you play him off the top of the key like how Draymond's functioned for Golden State for years and years and years. I think there is a lot of functional ways for CMB to positively impact winning, and especially for a team like OKC who has already so much existing talent, so much ball pressure and ball contained point of attack defense. Getting CMB who can be a high energy effort guy behind all of that as a cleanup crew member, getting blocks at the rim, rotating out in on the perimeter, and being another big body where, hey, if you want to play a little bit more aggressively with your bigs, blitz the basketball, CMB's frame and weight and size, even though he is a bit small at 6'7", he is still someone who can go out and have an impact defensively guarding bigs. So I think this is a guy who kind of is a little bit a Swiss Army knife for OKC, opens up some flexibilities for Mark Daigneault to work with, and I think the Thunder get a lot better here even, despite such an incredible season that they've had. Getting CMB at 15 just makes them all the better going into next year. Pick 16, the Memphis Grizzlies now at this spot, of course, shook up the NBA a couple of weeks ago with the Desmond Bane trade to Orlando. Now have this selection just outside of the lottery at number 16. And they're going to be able to replace some of what they're losing with Desmond Bane. And they're going to draft a guy, instead of a negative wingspan player, they're going to draft a guy with a really long wingspan. 16th overall, I have the Memphis Grizzlies here selecting wing Cedric Coward out of Washington State. Now only played 6 games this past year for the Cougars, but was incredibly productive in those 6 games. Shot the skin off the basketball, scored at will at the rim, shot over 70% on twos this past year in those 6 games, and was incredibly productive in the short and expedited sample size. But I think for Memphis specifically, what you're betting on here is the shooting talent, where at the combine he shot better than a majority of the other prospects in shooting drills, and I think solidified a lot of his draft stock from what he showed on film in just the short tenure he had for Washington State, and even before that, his tenures in Eastern Washington, where he shot the ball respectably well. I think he solidified a lot of the questions about him as a player just from the combine, where he had great physical measurements, 7'2" plus wingspan, a legitimate 6'6" wing with shoes on. This guy's big, long, looks the part of an NBA forward, and can shoot it. And all of those things make him very projectable. And I think for Memphis, who you're trying to now replace Desmond Bane, coming out with pick 16 and drafting a guy like Cedric Coward, who has some good functional tools to build off of, great length and size. The Grizzlies have found success drafting older prospects in the past, specifically Desmond Bane as a recent example. Drafting Cedric Coward here feels like a very good, safe outcome for Memphis, and I think 16 is a good spot for him to come off the board in this year's draft. At number 17, the Minnesota Timberwolves here now via the Detroit Pistons. This team is slated to lose some talent off their current roster. One of Julius Randle, Naz Reid, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker will probably not be on this team next season. My guess would be it's Nickeil. So we're going to look for Minnesota to try and find some talent and some guys who are ready to impact winning for this team ASAP. 17th overall, I have them selecting forward Nique Clifford out of Colorado State. I think this is a prospect here who has some interesting upside to build off of because of some of the functional tools he has when it comes to handling the basketball. You look at the body of work, the production he had for Colorado State this past year, where he was tasked with doing a little bit of everything. Leading ball handler, leading scorer, got on the glass a ton, just was one of the best athletes in college basketball when it came to a production standpoint. Had a 2% block rate and a 2% steal rate, one of the kind of unique crossover wings where had an impact defensively in both of these stock components. And I think for Minnesota specifically, if you are planning on probably losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker, of course, Terrence Shannon Jr., who drafted a year ago, is going to step up into that role a bit. But I also think at 17, what you're going to be able to do is try and find another guy who is a projectable talent coming into your roster with Nique Clifford. Shot the ball really well, has kind of stabilized his game from that component in that perspective. But then also, you're looking at a guy who maybe has some more on-ball creation talent. I think one of the things lacking for Minnesota is just another guy who can go get a bucket, specifically against tough defenses. And listen, Chris Finch is not a big believer in the mid-range jump shot. That's very clear and obvious with the way that he speaks and discusses the game and what his media availability even looks like. But Nique Clifford, his ability to get to the mid-range, it might find some weak spots in defenses that could be a good weapon for the Wolves to kind of unlock and look to use occasionally. And I think Clifford plus Dillingham next year plus Terrence Shannon Jr. kind of have a little bit of a mini youth movement going on in Minnesota while still being a good competitive veteran roster simultaneously. And I like that for Minnesota, both from a short-term perspective of being competitive, winning right now with Anthony Edwards early in his prime, but then also being able to extend that winning throughout a majority of Edwards' prime, even into probably his early 30s at the bare minimum with what Minnesota has going forward from a roster standpoint. I think the Wolves are really well positioned. Nique Clifford gives them an impact contributor immediately here on day one. At number 18, the Washington Wizards back on the clock here. Remember, at number 6, they went with Ace Bailey out of Rutgers after his fall to them was ultimately stopped by the Wizards selection. Now at 18, the Washington Wizards are going to come back and look to add more into their front court by selecting center Joan Beringer out of Cedevita Olympia, a big man with some elite rim protection traits, leads the Adriatic League in block percentage, and for his production in a professional league overseas is something I definitely think Washington would strongly consider. I mentioned earlier their willingness and desire to add two-way impact players, guys who can really win on the defensive end of the floor, and they've done so internationally. Drafted Alex Sarr, of course, a French-born prospect out of Perth from the NBL. The year prior to that, they took Bilal Coulibaly out of the LNB Pro A League. This would be another year where they take another first-round player from an international program, and I think it's worked out well so far for Washington. I think they've liked the results of it. Clearly, their scouting department is well-traveled. They are looking all over the globe for talent, and especially defensive talent. I think Joan Beringer checks a lot of those boxes for them. This gives them a pathway long-term to 48 minutes of good center play between Beringer and Sarr. Gives you some lineup versatility if you do want to return Sarr to playing some of the 4. Let Beringer be your center as a rim runner, lob catching threat around the rim. He has very good functional athletic tools. I do think there's still some skill development that needs to occur for Beringer to be a good short roll, non just traditional rim running lob threat. Like, there needs to be some meaningful growth for him to ever be more than that. But I think for Washington, it's a pretty safe floor pick for them at this spot, and a guy who can definitely return some value at number 18. At number 19, we look back to the Brooklyn Nets, who earlier drafted Jeremiah Fears at pick number 8. Brooklyn, who has some questions about their long-term center spot, especially will Nick Claxton be a long-term part of this team? What about Day'Ron Sharpe? He's a restricted free agent this offseason. I think that Brooklyn will definitely prioritize keeping him. At 19, I have them selecting center Asa Newell out of Georgia. This is a big man who I do think, depending on what they do with Claxton and or Sharp or both, they ultimately are in a spot where drafting Asa Newell, a guy who has some defensive mobility upside, a player who can cover ground and hedge out on the perimeter a bit, blitz ball screens, gives you some of that functionality, but also has some of those traditional center qualities of playing out of the pocket, being a screen and dive player, catching in the middle of the floor, a little bit of a baby hook he likes to go to, some interesting touch. And has stepped out and shot the three. Not great, but a little bit. And I think there's some growth for him to build on here. So for Brooklyn, whether you do trade Claxton or Sharp or neither of them, maybe Newell you can envision playing some 4. And I talked about, playing big ball and tall ball and the value of that. While everyone 5-6 years ago thought small ball was going to be the revolution that changed the NBA, it's actually been the opposite. And the bigger you are, the better. It shouldn't really be that shocking. Size deters, size wins in the NBA. It always has and always will. And Asa Newell for Brooklyn at number 19, giving them another big who can maybe function alongside their other bigs as a screen roll player, dribble handoff player. This is functional for Jordi Fernandez, and at the very worst gives you some front court depth, which is always valuable, especially when Brooklyn could be a real trade hub this offseason. Number 20, the Miami Heat now at this spot. Of course, a team that could heavily be invested into drafting a guard. They missed out on the Kevin Durant sweepstakes, although some reports are saying that they didn't even go after Durant that hard. I kind of find that a little hard to believe, but I do think Miami, who was invested and trying to get Durant, just came up a little bit short once again with their trade package. But number 20, I still think is a good asset to work with for the Heat. So at this spot, I have them selecting guard Jase Richardson out of Michigan State. This is a player who slides a little bit in these mock drafts because of his size, measured in at just 6'1" without shoes on. So you're looking with shoes on an NBA court, probably standing around 6'2". Not crazy wingspan, but a plus wingspan, which is definitely beneficial for his stock. And had a great season at Michigan State. He's a highly impactful college player, won a lot of his on-ball battles at Michigan State, and then I also think was extremely functional off the ball as a catch-and-shoot weapon, a drive closeout kind of guy, and an off-ball, catch-off-the-handoff, play-out-of-advantage player. And I think for Miami, when you have such a great head coach in Eric Spoelstra, a great DHO hub in Bam Adebayo, and a need for on-ball development at your point guard spot long-term, I think you can kind of mold and blend Jase Richardson into a combo of roles where you maybe lean on Tyler Hero, you lean on Bam Adebayo a bit for some of your creation, but then Jase Richardson can maybe shoulder some of that for you early in his career too, while still then being a very, very effective player off of those other guys. And I think for Miami, at number 20, this is probably the floor for Jase Richardson. It's hard for me to believe he would go any lower than this on draft night. And I do think ultimately this is a great spot for him on draft night to land in. And if he does get drafted to Eric Spoelstra, someone who's made smaller guards work very well in the past, and a lot of them lesser skilled than Jase, like you look at Gabe Vincent, who got paid after playing in Miami. Gabe Vincent's significantly less talented than Jase Richardson. If Gabe Vincent's been able to have a productive, solid NBA career, Jase Richardson definitely will for the Heat. I think this is a home run pick for them at number 20. Moving on to pick 21, the Utah Jazz. Back on the clock, they went with Trey Johnson at number 5. And now at 21, I'm coming back and drafting forward Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph's. Jazz fans, I'm sorry, the mock isn't any different for you from last week, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if you do walk away ultimately on draft night with Trey Johnson and Rasheer Fleming, you take significant strides forward, both long-term offensively with Trey Johnson's offensive skill set, but then you're taking a meaningful stride forward with your team defense, getting a really unique and versatile defensive player in Rasheer Fleming, someone who right now I do have concerns about his overall court awareness and defensive intangibles. But what I can tell you is the actual physical gifts that this guy has at 6'9" without shoes on, a true 7'5" wingspan, some serious small ball 5 potential, and some actual functional versatility as a 4 next to other size like a Walker Kessler. This gives the Jazz more foot speed. This gives them a guy who can function as a secondary shot blocker and gives you some pick and roll ball screen defensive versatility. Do you want to blitz? Do you want to switch? Do you want to hedge? Do you want to ice and play and drop? Like Fleming can do a little bit of everything for you defensively long-term with his size and physical traits. I do think he's a little bit of a bigger, slower Tari Eason. I don't think he's quite as physically or quite as offensively talented as Tari Eason was coming out of LSU, where he was so offensively productive for the Tigers. I don't think he's quite as good as Tari Eason as a prospect, but I do think he's still a good prospect in general, one that is definitely defensively slanted long-term. And I think for the Jazz, who need significant defensive development across their entire roster and their team identity, drafting at least one defensive-minded player in this draft is a must for them, in my opinion, when it comes to gearing toward long-term winning. And I think the Jazz finally get it right defensively, find a forward like Rasheer Fleming who can cover space, ground, and a multitude of different positions. At number 22, we toggle back to the Atlanta Hawks, who, remember, at number 13 earlier went with Egor Demin out of BYU. Now at 22, the Hawks here via the Los Angeles Lakers select center/forward Danny Wolf out of Michigan, giving Atlanta more of that functionality in your half court with Jalen Johnson's downhill juice, and we've seen how successful he can be with the ball in his hands, playing off of advantage, playing off of Trae Young, and then also just creating advantage a little bit more himself, kind of that little star jump we saw from Jalen this year before he got hurt. I think for Danny Wolf specifically, you're going to be able to toggle your offense like that in creative ways. Quinn Snyder's one of the more creative offensive coaches. And Wolf, who is scaling down his role a bit from the lead 1A option for Michigan to an ancillary skill player, becomes at the very worst an extremely safe bench creator bet for you, kind of in a Naz Reid, Kelly Olynyk role where off the bench he gets to handle the ball a bit, create for others, create for himself, shoot the basketball a bit. And then in the starting lineup or around your other starters, he has some functional off-ball tools where all of a sudden you're playing him in advantage and you're getting him the ball in the middle of the floor in a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1, and you can use a Kongwu. This gives Atlanta some more lineup versatility as well. Like right now they're pretty small, especially since they're likely to lose Clint Capella. A Kongwu's not a traditionally big center, so maybe playing him next to another skilled big like a Danny Wolf gives you a little bit more oomph into your front court, a little bit more size, a little bit more rebounding, and it kind of dampens out some of your flaws while you have a lot of guys already that can fly around like Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, Zachary Sachet. I do like the direction of this Hawks team. They've been able to put good pieces around Trae moving forward. I think Danny Wolf would be a nice little staple into that team as well, giving them more skill without sacrificing your size either in that direction. And I think the Hawks at 22 would do really well drafting Danny Wolf here at this spot. 23. No longer the Indiana Pacers, we are on to the New Orleans Pelicans, who traded the Pacers 2026 first-round pick for this selection. And after going with Khaman Maluach at number 7, I kind of hinted at New Orleans maybe being able to find a guard at number 23 that they like. And how about a developmental bet on guard Nolan Traore out of St. Quentin, a guy who a year ago, if you go back to my way too early mock that came out in the end of June 2024, I was talking about this guy as a potential top 5 pick in the draft. Ultimately just did not shape out that way, did not have the season over in the LNB Pro A this year that would warrant a top 5 selection, unfortunately. Just did not have the true shooting percentage, the efficiency as a scorer. You watch the way teams defend him. They go under ball screens pretty aggressively against him, dare him to shoot, which is one of the concerns I have about Traore. It's why he ended up lower on my board. But there are still some developmental traits to build on. Had a gaudy assist percentage this past year where he was a highly productive passer of the basketball. And when teams did go under in ball screens, he took up some of that space and can get downhill, has a pretty good first step, really solid positional size. Now he is extremely light. You look at his combine measurements, just measured in very, very small, around 175 pounds. So he's going to get pushed around a little bit early in his NBA career, but I do think if you're able to put 10, 15 pounds of muscle on this guy, which that's quite a bit, but you're looking at 3-4 year projections from where he is as a like late teenager to 22, 23, 24 years old, you're hoping he can definitely build that physical frame up a bit. And then from there, you're hoping on some shooting development as well. And if you get both of those things, this turns into an absolute home run steal for the Pelicans. Now, I'm a little bit unsure if you'll get either of those things fully, but if you get both of them to the extent that they possibly maybe could reach at some point, this is an absolute no-brainer selection for New Orleans, who ultimately in this draft ends up with another big and a point guard for the future. At 24, the Oklahoma City Thunder back on the clock. Remember, at number 15, they drafted Collin Murray-Boyles out of South Carolina. Now at 24, I have the Thunder selecting forward Will Riley out of Illinois. This is a long-term projection pick for Oklahoma City. As their roster gets more and more expensive down the road, it will be important for them to have guys who can step up into roles as they ultimately lose some depth on the edges of their roster over time. And Will Riley, someone who, honestly, if they draft him at 24, should not play at all in his rookie season for this team. He's just not good enough to actually warrant minutes for them, assuming that they're healthy and that their A team's actually on the floor. But Will Riley, like, what you're drafting here for is the skill set. You're looking at what he's been able to do in spurts, especially for Illinois, and going back to his high school tape where he puts the ball on the deck, he's able to create for others a little bit, solid assist rate, he's able to create for himself. The dribble pull-up's something I reference most frequently. Doesn't get to the rim a whole lot, but when he does, he's solid at finishing there. I think for Oklahoma City specifically, what you're betting on here is, again, this is another guy who's really thin and slight and has some real defensive deficiencies. His block and steal rate were terrible this past year, measured in at the combine at 186 pounds. So he's mostly skin and bones right now for a 6'9" player. But I think what you're hoping to do over time is to have his frame fill out, continue seeing that skill set progress, and maybe by the third year of his NBA career, maybe he's ready for 15 minutes a game for a good team. And that's what you're hoping and banking on if you're Oklahoma City, because down the road it's going to be hard to hold on to the Isaiah Joes, the Aaron Wiggins of the world, even though he's on a very good extension. Like, as Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren get big contracts over time, you're just going to lose some of your pieces. And the Thunder are very well equipped to deal with that. They have a litany of draft picks. They already have some young players under contract, like an AJ Mitchell, for example, a Dylan Jones. They already have ways kind of built up to protect themselves long term, but drafting a developmental player like Will Riley here could be another pathway for long-term protection if the Thunder don't trade this pick out of the first round. 25, the Orlando Magic on the clock now for the first time. Of course, made that Desmond Bane trade we referenced earlier and shifted their roster in a big way. And after thinking about it last week, I mocked Will Riley to Orlando at 25. After thinking about it now, especially with Will Riley off the board earlier in this mock draft, I just think guard is the way Orlando's going to go. Spend some more time combing over the roster. They still have a few big men there, Wendell Carter, Mo Wagner, and Goga Bitadze. I don't think they'll go center, ultimately with the contracts that they have on their books. So I think you look at 25 and you say, what kind of guard can we get that can shoot the ball? I think it's a very safe, obvious answer here. 25th overall, I have the Orlando Magic selecting guard Walter Clayton Jr. out of Florida. One of the better shooters in this entire draft. Had a tremendous run for Florida this past year. And you look at his college career where he started at Iona, ultimately transferred to Florida, and has seen consistent year-to-year improvement as an individual player. I think Orlando's going to bet on that continued development and improvement where with Cole Anthony now gone, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope gone as well too. Memphis, while yes, they did bring in Bane, I still think you're looking for a little bit more depth at the point guard spot. You're obviously going to start both Jalen Suggs and Desmond Bane together, but you need another guy who can come off the bench, function off the basketball as a catch-and-shoot player off of Franz and Paulo, a spacer. I think that's what Walter Clayton Jr. is going to provide for you. But he's also got a little bit of dynamism, really solid hesitation handle. He's able to get to spots on the floor, has a floater he likes to get to. I don't love the floater in general, but I think for a smaller guard like Walter Clayton Jr., it has been a useful tool for him, especially off that hesitation dribble. So I think for the Magic specifically, this isn't a pick where you're getting probably a 12-year starter in the NBA. I mean, it's pick number 25 in the draft, but you're getting a guy who I think functionally fits into your team roster, gives you a player who can shoot the basketball, come off the bench as a little bit of a scoring hub, which I think Orlando just needs a little bit more scoring juice. And with what Orlando was able to keep on their roster in the Bane trade, their team is still really good and poised defensively to compete at a high level once again this year on that end of the floor. And with a little bit more offensive talent in both Clayton Jr. and Bane, this team should just be a 50-plus win team almost automatically next year with how good their roster is as long as they're healthy. Pick 26, the Brooklyn Nets, the third selection that they have in this mock draft. Of course, pick number 4 for them is coming up right after at number 27. But 26 here, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting guard Ben Seraph out of Ratio Farm Ulm. He's had a tremendous season playing professional basketball alongside his teammate we talked about earlier in Noah Essengue, and had a tremendous showing very recently in the playoffs where he could potentially become a champion over there in the Euro Cup. And I think specifically what Seraph has provided to his team has been ball handling, shot making, and playmaking out of the pick and roll. And I think those things specifically are what makes him such an intriguing pick, possibly in the 20s. I do think, you could warrant him going higher in the draft. I like his game quite a bit. I think, he's going into a position where it's hard to carve out on-ball opportunities consistently in the NBA with how the game is played now, and it's not equal opportunity offense. But Saraf's skill set is definitely intriguing and dynamic. I definitely believe in his bet as a long-term off-the-bench go-to player and ball handler creator for a team. I think there's a lot of connectivity that you can unlock with him as well. He passes the ball very well, sees both sides of the court, weak side, strong side. I love his little jump pass as another little micro skill that he has that he weaponizes quite a bit with his really great positional size already, measured in 6'6" without shoes on. So you're looking at a legitimate 6'7" guard who can pass the ball over the top of the defense, leaves his feet somewhat early to be able to open up some passing windows. And I think for the Nets at 26, this is a really great development bet for them. This is a tremendous fit into their dribble handoff system. Gives them a left-handed player that I think would function well off of Jeremiah Fears. If you want to try and prioritize middle drives, you can put Fears on the left wing, put Saraf on the right wing, and you're opening up both of the middle for both of them going through their strong hands. So I think that's a lot of beneficial kind of mix and matching you can do between the two guys. And if you want to go empty side ball screens, you can put them counter to each other. Saraf on the left and Fears on the right. So Brooklyn, I think, would have a lot of functionality to uncover with this, and having two players who are ball dominant guys with opposite handedness is actually a really good weapon. We saw that for Houston in 2018 with Chris Paul and James Harden. Now that's a different level, right? It's a little bit better than Saraf and Fears probably. I don't want to compare those two guys to Harden and CP3. It's not the same caliber, but I'm talking about the handedness, and having two kind of high volume ball handlers off of each other can actually be really dynamic if used correctly. And I think Brooklyn would be an interesting landing spot for both of them in this draft. And then at 27, Brooklyn's still on the board here. They'll go ahead and select Liam McNeely out of UConn. The earlier players we've drafted for them, Fears and Saraf and Newell, are all more central long-term to the Nets' team identity, their play style, offensive identity, flowing into handoffs, high ball screens, all of that kind of stuff, like the way they're actually planning on playing. But one of the best things about Jordi Fernandez is getting production out of the guys that you're not necessarily game planning for. And I think if I want to point back to Dorian Finney-Smith early in the season before they traded him to Los Angeles, DFS was having probably the best season of his career offensively, and it was playing off of advantage, playing out of opportunities because of what Jordi Fernandez's system was allowing Brooklyn to get offensively. For a team that, honestly, compared to their opponents, was pretty talent deficited, like they were still able to succeed and find open avenues and find scoring opportunities for their role players pretty consistently by generating that advantage through play design. And I think for Brooklyn, if you're looking at getting a guy who can maximize those opportunities, Liam McNeely is definitely one who really solid size, rebounds the ball well for his position, but the overall skill set points to standstill, catch and shoot sniper. That's what he was at Montverde Academy, playing off of Cooper Flagg and Derik Queen and Newell there. And I think playing for Brooklyn off of Fears and Saraf and Newell and Claxton and like all of the pieces right there in Brooklyn, like you already are set up in a way to promote that. Like Liam McNeely's a guy who can be a solid fifth play finisher for you, where he's going to stand in the corner, stand on the wing, catch and shoot, knock down open jump shots, defend somewhat adequately. I'm not super high on McNeely myself, but I definitely think this is kind of the range where he should go on draft night. And then he's going to rebound for his position. That's definitely valuable as well, especially on the defensive glass. So I think for Brooklyn, this is definitely functional, fits their team well, and fits the picks we've already made for them in this mock draft. Pick 28, the Boston Celtics here now. At this spot, I think Boston is, of course, an interesting team to discuss because they're going to be salary dumping. This pick could possibly get traded in one of those salary dumps for a team to harbor one of Drew Holiday or Kristaps Porzingis' contracts. We'll see what ultimately happens there. But the Celtics at 28 go out and select center Maxime Reynaud out of Stanford. And I think with the likelihood that Porzingis is not a Celtic by the start of next season, finding a long-term developmental center is important for them. Center is one of the harder positions to actually effectively develop, and it takes time. So even though Reynaud is an older college prospect, four-year senior out of Stanford, giving him a year of NBA time to grow and develop and adjust would be pretty good for him before Jason Tatum comes back healthy. give him a year under his belt to actually learn and grow and develop at the NBA level, adjust to the NBA's pace, spacing, game, defensive coverages, all of the stuff that would be, I think, pretty challenging for him immediately in his NBA career. While he does have really great mobility skills, I do question the rim protection and the value of him defending out on the perimeter. So when you have a big who's maybe not the best rim protector, not this clear, obvious, fluid mover defensively, you have some concerns there. But I do think for Boston, who has such great point of attack defense, if you kind of simplify the role for Reynaud, tell him, hey, just go block shots, go be active and try and get in the picture, Boston's point of attack defense might help carry some of that, especially early on when you have guys like White, and if they do keep Drew Holiday, they have Jaylen Brown obviously still. Like, those guys are going to help at least Reynaud grow and get accustomed to the NBA early, and then hopefully over that first year without Tatum, by the time Tatum's back, ready to come back and actually play, hopefully Reynaud's at a spot where he's not just learning, but he's maybe even ready to be a starter for you or be an 18 to 20 minute per game big for you off the bench. And I think that's what the Celtics would probably be hoping on, especially if they lose Horford and Porzingis ultimately this offseason. Pick 29, the Phoenix Suns, who at number 10, remember, went with Derik Queen earlier in this mock draft. Now at 29, they're going to make another selection of a prospect that I am enamored with in this draft cycle. 29th, I have the Phoenix Suns selecting forward Adu Thiero out of Arkansas. And this is a pick. This is a player that I think makes a ton of sense for what the Suns need. I talked about their need to get bigger, longer, more athletic this offseason. Derik Queen, of course, addressed that in a big way, giving them some of that lineup versatility and still skill to build off of. Thiero becomes a dream fit here for them at 29 as a dynamic, elite, athletic cutter. Shot over 60% on twos this past year, had a 69.2% free throw rate. That's a testament to how athletic he is. Put defenders kind of in a bind where if they couldn't stay in front of him, they couldn't contain him, they had to foul him. And I think for Phoenix specifically, they already have a very good athlete in Ryan Dunn. Let's get another defensive-minded athlete in Adu Thiero here who can fill a lot of gaps for you, bring elite nail help, bring some low man help, and has just this knack of winning possessions for your team, whether it's rotating over as the low man and shooting over and getting a huge block out of nowhere. Or, hey, ball's up in the air, loose ball, 50-50 ball, he's going to come down with it because he's a better athlete than the guy across from him. And I think for the Suns, that's something over the last couple of years we just haven't been able to say about this team. They don't have a lot of athletes who are better than the guy across from them. Adu Thiero gives them that. Most nights he's going to be one of the best athletes on the entire floor. Get this guy in your building. He's super functional as a cutter. I think would fit tremendously off of Derik Queen out of the middle of the floor. Thiero is extremely functional, has a great first step. Now he can't shoot the ball, but we saw the Suns already be willing to kind of roll that dice with Ryan Dunn this past year, valuing his defensive talent over his shooting skill. And I think they're going to be willing to roll that kind of dice again with how successful the Dunn pick ultimately was for them in the 20s. I think they're going to be willing to take that kind of stab again for Thiero at 29. Then at 30, the Los Angeles Clippers here at this spot. And I'm not shaking it up from last week. At 30, I have the Clippers selecting center Ryan Kalkbrenner out of Creighton. And I think for LA specifically, I've talked about their need for a backup big man, a need for someone who can anchor their defense when Zubac is out of the game, and for someone to function as a lob threat, rim roller, and player out of the pocket for Harden when Zubac is also out. And I think Kalkbrenner specifically as a screen set dive player, a massive rim volume guy where he's going to catch at the rim, dunk, has good hands, good play finishing tools. This is a player who, even with a slightly lower usage than what you'd expect at Creighton to begin with, you kind of minimize his role a little bit further, kind of simplify everything for him. You're not going to guide your offense through him or to him. You're going to have him function as an advantage finisher, a guy who plays off the catch at the rim. And all of that is extremely functional for the Clippers. This is much better than what they've been trying to do with a Daniel Tice, Mason Plumlee, Daniel Oturu, Fiondu Kabengele, Kai Jones. I mean, they've tried everything here. They just need someone who's functional. And that's exactly what Ryan Kalkbrenner is. The analytics love him. And it's a guy who projects to be very moldable and fittable into an NBA offense contextually. And I think Kalkbrenner landing next to James Harden especially is such a good spot for him in this year's draft. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Again, this was the final mock draft Monday of the cycle. I will have one more mock draft out the day of the NBA draft. Thanks again all so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.